Look at the marks on this woman's face. For decades, we've called these age spots or liver spots, operating under the assumption that they are a natural byproduct of the aging process or a sign of internal organ failure. These patches are the visible result of a localized buildup of melanin and lipofuscin. They represent a specific biological failure point, a map of accumulated invisible damage that has reached a threshold deep within the epidermis. The primary catalyst for this damage is ultraviolet radiation. Whether the source is years of incidental sun exposure or the concentrated intensity of a tanning bed, UV rays penetrate the skin to trigger a permanent change in pigment production. Erasing these spots begins with a shift in perspective. Once we recognize this pigmentation as a failed defense mechanism against radiation trauma, we can address the specific cellular pathways that created it. To understand that failure, we have to look at the cellular level. Ultraviolet waves pierce the skin's outer barrier and travel toward the basal layer, threatening the DNA of the cells responsible for skin renewal. In response to this threat, the skin signals its melanocyte cells to begin producing a protective pigment shield. It is a rapid response maneuver designed to absorb the radiation before it can cause deeper genetic damage. This production relies on an enzyme called tyrosinase. It catalyzes the chemical conversion of amino acids into melanin, starting a mass production of dark pigment particles that flow outward from the cell. Under chronic UV exposure, the system becomes overwhelmed. Instead of distributing evenly to create a uniform tan, the pigment creates a traffic jam, clumping into a dense mass at the very base of the epidermis. The brown spot you eventually see on the surface is simply the visible evidence of this internal, chaotic cellular defense. Because hyperpigmentation was traditionally categorized as a surface-level cosmetic flaw, clinical solutions focused almost entirely on destruction, removing the pigment by any means necessary. This led to the widespread use of bleaching agents. As seen in this vintage advertisement, products were marketed to forcefully strip the skin of its natural color using aggressive chemical interventions. The industry standard for decades has been hydroquinone. It is a potent chemical that stops pigment production by poisoning the melanocyte cells directly, often leading to severe irritation or permanent damage to the skin structure. Physical interventions are just as intense. Lasers and chemical peels use high-energy pulses or acids to shatter pigment clusters or dissolve the skin's top layers, causing the surrounding tissue to ripple from the impact. These scorched earth tactics often carry a high price. They can result in chromic inflammation, permanent white halos around treated areas, or a rebound effect where the skin produces even more pigment to protect itself from the treatment. Attempting to solve a biological defense problem with further physical violence often convinces the skin it is under a fresh attack, reinforcing the very cycle we are trying to break. Modern dermatology is moving away from this chemical warfare, focusing instead on supporting the skin's existing ecosystem to regulate its own pigment levels. This shift centers on the stratum microbiome, a living veil of beneficial bacteria that coats the body and communicates directly with our skin cells. This is where biotechnology like THBG or Brightenil comes in. In this diagram, we see these molecules resting on the skin's surface, interacting with the bacteria already living there. These bacteria metabolize the THBG, breaking it down into an active tyrosinase inhibitor. This targeted compound bypasses upper layers to reach the basal melanocytes, fitting into their receptors and signaling pigment factories to power down without harsh physical trauma. By utilizing the microbiome to facilitate cellular communication, we can normalize skin tone without the risks associated with the previous era of aggressive intervention. Even the most advanced biotechnology is ineffective if the skin remains vulnerable to new radiation strikes. Consistent SPF creates a physical barrier that deflects light waves, preventing signals that trigger pigment overproduction. Below the surface, jagged free radical particles bounce erratically, aggravating melanocytes. An internal defense of polyphenols enters the bloodstream, binding to free radicals and stabilizing the skin's environment. When we manage these pathways both externally and internally, we shift from aggressive interference to a model of biological support. This creates the stability necessary for consistent pigment regulation and a more uniform complexion.